In the heart of the old world lies a vast realm of forests, rivers, and grand cosmopolitan cities. This is the Empire of Sigmar, greatest of the nations of men. Over 2 millennia ago, the land that would become the Empire was inhabited by several tribes in constant conflict with each other until a great hero arose to unite them under one banner. Born under the blazing light of a twin-tailed comet, Sigmar quickly became a well-respected warrior and leader, having already led his tribesmen against the greenskin hordes dozens of times by the age of 15. In the following years, the Greenskins captured Kurgan Ironbeard, High King of the Dwarves, along with several members of his family. A gruesome fate no doubt awaited the king, but Sigmar and his warriors ambushed the orcs, freeing the king and his family. In gratitude, Kurgan awarded the young human warrior with a great rune-forged warhammer named Gal Maraz, Skull Splitter in the Dwarven tongue. Sigmar would use this hammer in every battle thereafter, earning the name Heldendhammer, the Hammer of Goblins. After years of conflict, Sigmar realized mankind's enemies were too numerous and too powerful for a divided humanity to endure indefinitely, and so embarked on a mission to unite the tribes into a single great empire. In time, through a mixture of war and diplomacy, the Heldenhammer's dream of united nation of man began to take shape, but a new threat was emerging from the east. Envoys of Kurgan Ironbeard came to Sigmar, warning of an orc horde massing in the Badlands, one of such size that it eclipsed all others that came before, and would surely be the end of both man and dwarf if left unchecked. Gathering all the warriors they could, the tribes of men and their dwarven allies made their stand at Blackfire Pass, holding their ground against the relentless orc horde. The battle lasted for several savage hours, but against all odds, the forces of order emerged victorious. So impressive was the victory that the High Priest of Ulrich, the god of war, pronounced Sigmar as emperor, with his coronation marking the beginning of the Imperial calendar. Kurgan Ironbeard once again awarded Sigmar with a gift for his battle prowess, a magnificent dwarven forged crown for the new emperor. Also, the dwarf king had the renowned runesmith, Alaric the Mad, forged 12 magical swords, known as Rune Fangs, for the 12 tribal chieftains that followed the Heldenhammer into battle. Sigmar's reign saw an unprecedented time of growth and prosperity for the united tribes. In time, villages grew into bustling towns, which in turn became impressive cities. New trade routes for the Dwarven Carracks were established, and a more organized and disciplined military was created, but the Empire still had many enemies that threatened its survival. Sigmar would fight many wars to protect his fledgling empire, with the most notable being the Chaos Invasion of Morkar, the first ever chosen, and the undead menace brought by the ancient Nekahara necromancer Nagash. Despite the numerous threats to its existence, the Empire endured them all in defiance of all the odds. The Emperor's reign would last for 50 years, but on one fateful day, Sigmar sat up from his throne and placed down his crown. He wordlessly passed through the gates of his capital, Reichdorf, and headed toward the World's Edge Mountains, never to be seen again. None know why the Heldenhammer abandoned his throne, but all would remember the legendary deeds of his life, hailing him as the greatest of Imperial heroes. So revered in fact was the Emperor, that a few decades after his departure, the cult of Sigmar was founded, elevating him to the pantheon of gods. As Sigmar fathered no sons to succeed him, the tribal chieftains were left with a dilemma on who should be crowned the next emperor. Following the Heldenhammer's example of decentralized rule, it was decided that one man would be elected to the position of emperor, with the power to dictate laws and policies that affected the empire as a whole, but each of the elector counts, as they would become to be known, would be free to govern their own territories as they saw fit. The following millennia, a period known as the Drive to the Frontiers, was a time of conquest and prosperity for the Empire. Elector counts expanded the territories of their provinces, conquering tribes that refused to join Sigmar's union and colonizing new lands. Ambitious emperors expanded the Empire's borders as a whole, founding new provinces. Most notable among these emperors was Sigismund the Conqueror, who subjugated the Juten Kingdom and conquered many lands beyond the Grey Mountains and the World Edge Mountains. By the 10th century, the Empire had reached its territorial and military height, with no single power in the Old World able to match its might. But in time, the people of the Empire will come to know tragedy as well as triumph. The second millennium saw the rise of a dynasty of emperors from the province of Drakwold that plunged the Empire into an era of hedonism and excess that slowly began to rot Imperial society from within. In 1111 of the Imperial calendar, a devastating plague swept across the Empire, depopulating entire regions of human and even animal life. The Emperor, Boris Goldgatherer, cared little for the suffering of his people and locked himself in his palace to wait out the plague, but in 1115, the devastating disease finally found the elusive emperor. As he lay dying, Boris saw a horrifying figure approach him, a large rat-like creature that walked upright like a man and wore tattered green robes. The monstrosity leaned into the dying emperor and revealed he was one of the Skaven, a race of subterranean ratmen, and that it was they who unleashed the plague and would be the heralds of humanity's doom. That very night, the Skaven burst forth from their under-empire and swept the land like the very plague they had spawned. All hope seemed lost. The final hour had come, but in the province of Middenland, the Elector Count Manfred von Zelt fought on. Breaking the siege of his capital of Middenheim, Manfred routed the Skaven to the banks of the Talabek and the Reich rivers, slaughtering all he could find. For the next decade, Manfred would defeat the Ratmen in several battles, until in 1124, the Elector Count slew Supreme Warlord Vermik, causing the Skaven to flee back to their subterranean realm. Manfred would thereafter be known as Skaven Slayer, and would be elected Emperor. Skaven Slayer would spend most of his 25-year reign rebuilding the crippled empire, and would gain a reputation for stern but just leadership. Unfortunately for the Middenland Emperor, his rule would be brought to an end in 1152 by Skaven assassins in revenge for foiling their plans for conquest. In 1359, the Count of Sturland was elected Emperor with the support of the cult of Sigmar, but Countess Attila of Talabekland denounced the Sturlander as corrupt, and with the support of the cults of Ulrich and Tal, declared herself Empress. In the following year, Sturland invaded Talabekland, but was soundly defeated at the Battle of the Talabek. For the next 200 years, Attila's descendants, known as the Alatin Emperors, would continue to challenge the rule of the elected emperor, but for a time, the empire managed to avoid full-scale civil war. However, in 1547, the cult of Ulrich fell out of favor with the Alatin Emperors, and pledged their support to Count Siegfried of Middenland for the imperial throne. Despite the support of the cult, Siegfried was rejected by the Electoral Council, but upon his return to Middenheim, declared himself emperor, with his descendants becoming known as the Wolf Emperors. Thus began the time of three emperors, an age of civil war and religious strife. The Electoral Council would entirely break down, with the imperial provinces becoming independent sovereign nations in all but name. The empire's foes would not fail to take advantage of this time of disunity. In 1705, a massive orc army led by Gorbad Ironclaw marched through Blackfire Pass and ravaged the southern provinces. In a desperate attempt to halt the orc advance, the Counts of Solund and Wissenland confronted the Greenskin Horde at the Battle of Solund's Crown. The battle was a devastating loss for the Empire, with the Count of Solund killed by Gorbad himself, his body mutilated, and his runefang taken as a trophy. Eventually, Gorbad's invasion was checked at the Siege of Altdorf in the province of Reichland, but the Orc warlord's damage to the Empire would leave a permanent mark. The province of Solund was so devastated by the Greenskin invasion, its entire territory would be annexed by its neighbor Wissenland. But even this great tragedy would pale in comparison to what would come after. In 1797, the Lord of Sylvania, Otto van Draak, married his daughter Isabella to a mysterious stranger named Vlad von Karstein. Unknown to the petty lord, Vlad was a vampire, an undead creature of great strength, and quickly consolidated power in the region. For the next 200 years, Vlad slowly built up his undead army, with the other Elector Counts too busy with their own schemes to pay attention to the backwater province of Sylvania until it was too late. In 2010, believing the Empire was weak enough for his conquest, Vlad led his army of undead and fellow vampires into Stirland and Talabecland. At the Battle of Essen-Ford, the Lord of Sylvania made an offer to the opposing Talabec army: serve him in life, or slave for him in death. The Talabeclanders refused and attacked the undead host, but no matter how many were slain, Vlad would simply reanimate the fallen dead, and soon the Imperial army was overwhelmed. Von Karstein made good on his promise by killing every captive he had taken and adding their bodies to his undead legions. Seeing an opportunity to strike down his foe, the Talabec general broke free from his captor's grasp, grabbed von Karstein's sword, and decapitated the vampire lord before being torn apart himself. The general's sacrifice was in vain, however, as that very night, Vlad von Karstein somehow returned from death and led his army deeper into the Empire. For several decades, Vlad's undead legions ravaged the land, and the vampire lord always managed to return to the head of his army whenever he was struck down. In 2051, the Sylvanian army laid siege to Altdorf. The Grand Theogonist, Wilhelm III, High Priest of Sigmar, spent 3 days in prayer in the Great Temple of Sigmar, and when he emerged, claimed that the Heldendhammer himself revealed to him the secret to the vampire's destruction. Wilhelm sent Felix Mann, the greatest thief of his time, to sneak into the vampire's camp and steal a magical ring from Vlad's finger. Felix did not return, however, and his mission presumed a failure, and not long after his departure, Vlad ordered an assault on the walls. For an hour, the Grand Theogonist and the Vampire Lord dueled each other upon the battlements, until Wilhelm charged, toppling both over the walls and onto the spikes below. Felix Mann may have succeeded in his mission after all, as upon Vlad's death, the undead legion quickly began to crumble. The remaining vampires were forced to retreat back to Sylvania. Had the Elector Counts united, they could have wiped out the undead menace from Imperial land permanently, but instead, they returned to fighting each other, and Sylvania will continue to haunt the Empire. Konrad von Karstein would emerge as Vlad's successor, but lacked any of his predecessor's temperament. Konrad was a mad and violent killer, concerned only with the slaughter of his enemies. Not only did he reignite war with the Empire, but also attacked the Dwarven Karaks, defeating armies from both races on several occasions. The Battle of Grimmoor in 2121 would see Konrad's luck run out, however, when a combined Imperial and Dwarven army overwhelmed the Mad Vampire Lord's army, and was finally killed by Count Helmar of Reichland with his ancestral Runefang. Manfred von Karstein would be the next Vampire Lord to rule over Sylvania. In 2132, the undead legions of von Karstein attacked the unsuspecting Empire, crushing the hastily assembled armies sent to stop him. When Manfred reached Altdorf, the Grand Theogonist stood atop the walls. In his hands was the Liber Mortis, one of the 9 books in the Gash, and began to recite the great spell of unbinding from its pages. With his army crumbling, Manfred was forced to lift the siege, but instead of retreating, traveled north along the River Reich toward the city of Marienburg. Upon arriving, von Karstein assaulted the city, but his army was repulsed and settled down for a siege. When his scouts reported an army from Altdorf was quickly approaching his rear, Manfred lifted the siege and headed east. For several years afterward, the eastern provinces would endure several campaigns launched by the Lord of Sylvania until the Elector Counts united to destroy the vampiric threat permanently, and with assistance from the dwarves, cornered Manfred at the Battle of Helfen. Although the cost would be high, the armies of the Empire and the Kara Zenkor stood victorious. The Elector Count of Stirland had personally defeated the Vampire Lord in combat, his mangled corpse seeping into the depths of the swamp. Although Manfred's body would never be recovered, it was believed by all that the Sylvanian threat had finally been extinguished. In 2301, the corrupting influence of chaos had waxed, and under the leadership of Asavar Kol, the newly crowned Everchosen, a vast army of demons and chaos warriors poured into the kingdom of Kislev. Within the empire itself, beastmen war herds rampaged throughout the provinces, and insidious cults led rebellions in the name of the dark gods. In the city of Newland, a powerful Tzeentch-worshipping cult called the Magi unleashed chaotic demons upon the city streets. In the skies above the city, a twin-tailed comet burned through the heavens. Taking this as a sign from the Heldendhammer, Magnus von Bildhofen, a young minor noble of Newland, led a counterattack wiping out the Magi and their demons. Magnus then rallied all the men he could for a great crusade against the chaotic taint spreading throughout the empire. The young noble traveled from city to city, using his skills as an orator to convince more and more men to join his crusade, and soon enough, even the elector counts backed him with their own armies. While in Middenheim, Magnus received messengers from Tsar Alexis of Kislev, begging for aid against the Everchosen's forces. Magnus assembled his army and marched to Kislev's aid, detaching a cavalry force to reach the besieged city of Prague. The Imperial cavalry failed to reach the city in time, however, the victorious forces of chaos casting terrible curses upon its denizens. Although too late to save Prague, the Imperial cavalry managed to ambush and destroy the rear guard of the Chaos Army as it marched toward the capital of Kislev, leaving the Everchosen blind in its rear. As Asavar Kol laid siege to the city of Kislev, Magnus and his dwarven allies of Karaz-e-Karak arrived. Using the element of surprise to their advantage, it was decided that the Empire army would attack the western flank, with the dwarves taking the southern flank. At dawn, the trap was sprung, and at first it seemed the Chaos host would be overrun, but the momentum of the attack stalled due to the size of the Chaos army. When the Everchosen organized a counterattack, the forces of order quickly lost ground. Just when it seemed the forces of chaos would emerge victorious, the Imperial cavalry sent to Prague arrived and slammed into the northern flank. With renewed vigor, the Imperial, Dwarven, and Kislevite forces squeezed the Chaos Horde until Magnus and the Everchosen faced each other in personal combat. A titanic duel erupted upon the battlefield, with the young noble of Newland emerging as the victor, sending the Everchosen's army into a rout at the sight of their fallen leader. Magnus, shortly thereafter with overwhelming support, would be elected emperor. For the first time in several centuries, the imperial provinces were united under a single leader, and the empire would enter into a Renaissance age, a rebirth of security, trade, and confidence in imperial institutions. In 2502, Karl Franz, Elector Count of Reichland and Prince of Altdorf, was elected emperor, but not without a vocal number of detractors. To prove himself worthy of his new position, the Emperor's first act was to muster an army to fend off Norse raiding parties that were pillaging the coast of Nordland. Using a powerful collection of celestial wizards to predict the location of the next raid, Karl Franz set up an ambush, destroying the longship fleet and decimating the marauder force. The Reichland Emperor would earn a number of victories in the following years, personally leading his men in battle whenever possible. Among the most notable of these engagements include the Battle of Norduin in 2502, where Karl Franz led the Reichsguard into the Bretonnian Knights, breaking their line, and at the Battle of Blackfire Pass, where the Prince of Altdorf, like the mythical founder of the Empire, smashed a massive orc horde that threatened to destroy his realm. Although the military triumphs of Karl Franz are certainly notable, the many achievements of the Reichland Emperor extend beyond the military. With the blessing and financial support of Karl Franz, the Imperial Engineer School has flourished, spawning several notable inventions such as the Hellblaster volley gun and the repeater handgun. When a dispute between the Counts of Sturland and Talabecland threatened to plunge the Empire into civil war, it was the diplomatic and oratory skills of Karl Franz that managed to cool tensions between the Counts. In the arena of politics and legislation, the Emperor's understanding of human envy allowed him to maintain stability and pass needed reforms, not by giving people what they wanted, but what they did not want other people to have. He skillfully maneuvered the cults of Sigmar and Ulrich into a competition to gain his favor, maintaining stability. In 2506, he convinced the Merchants Guild of Altdorf to pass the Stink Act, not because they cared about the sanitation of the city, but because they believed it would be the financial ruin of rival guilds. Although the early days of his reign were full of critics, none today can deny that not only is Karl Franz worthy of being emperor, but in fact he is one of the greatest leaders in Imperial history. Despite these seemingly prosperous times, the power of chaos once again waxes, and rumors have spread that a new Everchosen has emerged, with a great host at his command, one of such size not seen since the days of Magnus and Astavar Kol. Only time will tell if the Reichland Emperor will prevail in the inevitable coming conflict, or if the Dark Gods will finally rule supreme and choke the world in a tide of rot, deceit, excess, and blood.